Hey everyone, welcome back to Inside Gaming for Monday. The tragic events over the weekend in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio have brought out a familiar scapegoat, video games.
Yeah, politicians once again are blaming video games for acts of horrific violence, despite study after study showing that there's no such connection.
Let's check out the latest round of outrage. Take it away, Brian.
Well, it kicked off just hours after the El Paso shootings when House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy went on Fox News and singled out video games as a cause of the massacre. Specifically, he suggested that games led to increased violence by young people, which again, not supported by the facts.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. So McCarthy said, quote, "I've always felt that it's a problem for future generations and others. We've watched from studies shown before what it does to individuals, and you look at these photos of how it took place, you can see the actions within video games and others."
Then Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, one of the most powerful people in the state's government, also blamed video games. He pointed to the fact that the El Paso shooter referenced Call of Duty in his manifesto and said, "We've always had guns, we've always had evil, but what's changed where we see this rash of shooting? I see a video game industry that teaches young people to kill."
And in a speech this morning about the shootings, President Trump also mentioned gruesome and grisly video games as contributing to the glorification of violence in our society.
To be fair, other politicians disagreed with the connection between video games and violence. Who did that, Brian?
It was U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She tweeted directly in response to McCarthy's comments, and she said, "Video games aren't causing mass shootings, white supremacy is."
Damn.
Of course, we've seen video games come up as a convenient scapegoat before. Time and time again, this always happens, and politicians from both parties have blamed video games for gun violence.
In the early 90s, Democratic Senators Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl held hearings about video games and their possible effects on children.
These led to the video game industry regulating itself, creating the ESRB rating system in games that exist to this day.
Yeah, it was formed in 1994 by the Entertainment Software Association, which would go on to dox a bunch of journalists this week, including some of our own. Love it. And outright blaming video games for mass shootings dates back to the Columbine high school shootings in 1999.
I'm not going to name them because they don't deserve it, but those two shooters were known to be fans of Doom, and that caused a whole video game panic back in 1999. A Gallup poll actually later showed that 62% of adults nationwide at the time believed that entertainment was a major catalyst for the Columbine shootings.
I've had those arguments with my grandparents regarding Columbine. They're like, those video games you play, well, what happens in them? I'd be like, well, have I shot anyone? They're like, yeah, but you could.
Something I don't really understand might be the blame for something that I also don't really understand.
Scary and foreign.
President Bill Clinton even called for an investigation into the advertising practices of the entertainment industry.
More recently, after the shooting in Parkland, Florida last year, which killed 17 people, President Trump also blamed video games, saying, "I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts."
Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin blamed all sorts of media, including music and TV, but he singled out video games for corrupting the minds of young people, saying in an interview, quote, "There's nothing to prevent children from playing video games," which he said celebrate the slaughtering of people.
Yikes. Of course, these claims have been debunked millions of times, and video games are an easy scapegoat for politicians who don't want to confront the much tougher issues surrounding mass shootings.
Yeah, it also completely ignores countries like Japan, which have plenty of video games, but almost no gun violence.
Yeah, you see more people playing video games in Japan than you do here, for sure.
At least half the population of Japan plays video games, compared to about 70% in the US. Then again, it's a lot harder to get a gun in Japan too, so it's not exactly apples to apples.
Yeah. As for video games and violence, there have been lots of studies over the years into a possible connection. So let's dig into a few, Brian.
So there's a ton to mention here. In 2017, some German researchers did a study on 15 males who played violent games, talking about Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, and Battlefield on a regular basis. The participants were shown drawings that were designed to elicit empathetic reactions, and then researchers would measure their neural responses. It found no evidence of long-term desensitization due to violent games.
Oh wait, there's more. According to a 2018 study by researchers at the University of York in the UK, there's no evidence of a link between violent video games and behavior.
The authors wrote, in a series of experiments with more than 3,000 participants, the team demonstrated that video game concepts do not prime players to behave in certain ways, and that increasing the realism of violent video games does not necessarily increase aggression in game players.
But yes, there's even more.
What?
Yeah, I know. A few years ago, Winnie DeCamp, an associate professor of sociology at Western Michigan University, also tried to study a link between the two using a survey of more than 6,000 eighth graders. So, what did you find?
wait for it, that video games, no matter how twisted and gory they might be, don't predict if someone would have violent behavior.
There's more evidence, right, Brian?
Oh yeah, so Christopher Ferguson, he's a professor of psychology at Stetson University. He studied the studies, so he just sort of looked at everything. He wrote in 2018 that he studied violent video games for almost 15 years, said there is no evidence to support these claims that violent media and real-world violence are connected. He looked at more than 100 studies on the subject. He found that violent video games had little impact on kids' aggression, mood, helping behavior, or grades.
Even the US Supreme Court weighed in on the subject back in 2011, and they also dismissed any connection. Justice Antonin Scalia compared violent video games to cartoons starring Bugs Bunny or Roadrunner, saying they both had a minimal effect on their actions.
So why do politicians keep on blaming video games? Well, probably because they're an easy target.
James Allen Fox, a professor of criminology at Northeastern University, called video games, quote, an easy scapegoat, saying that politicians, quote, don't lose votes by blaming the video game industry.
It's a really good point. It's not going to make any of the old white people who vote mad.
Not a lot of lobbyists on behalf of the gaming industry, right?
And while there's been a lot of scholarship into video games and violence, there hasn't been a lot of study into gun violence in the US.
That's because groups like the NRA have worked to back laws to limit research into the causes of gun violence.
That goes back to a piece of legislation called the Dickey Amendment in 1996, which said that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention couldn't use money to advocate or promote gun control.
That amendment was pushed by the NRA after a study in 1993 concluded that having a handgun in a home almost triples the chances of someone being killed there.
Yeah, and obviously that study outraged the NRA and they called it politically motivated, so they got into politics themselves and got the Dickey Amendment passed.
What else have they been up to?
The NRA over the years has been involved in pushing for more relaxed gun laws in a lot of states, like in Texas. Here in Texas, you can openly carry handguns as well as long guns like the AR-15. This year, actually, the NRA celebrated what it called a highly successful year in Texas, getting 10 of its bills passed.
Sorry, that's just a lot to take
So
in.
there's a whole sordid history of lobbying groups blocking research in the US, as well as relaxing various gun laws.
But as we've seen time and time again, there will always be politicians looking to blame video games whenever there's a massive tragedy, and that doesn't seem like it's going to change anytime soon.
Obviously, it just sucks for all of us who play and enjoy video games and try to celebrate them, and the ones that are good, and some of the ones that have no guns in them at all.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's going to change.
Brian, do you think we're ever going to get to a time where we can just say, no, there's a lot of research that says what you're saying is wrong, you have to stop saying that?
I think it's up to journalists, actually, when politicians say stuff like this. I think right in the moment, journalists have to say, actually, that's not true. Studies don't show that, and then kind of go from there. But I think you have to fact check them in real time on it.
I guess some of the issue there could be that the older political journalists maybe aren't informed on video games either, so it's not coming up in conversation, but...
Yep.
Either way, sorry to have such a bummer of a story for you this Monday. Hopefully the rest of the week is a little more lighthearted.
We'll see you guys tomorrow.
That has come to a screeching halt. Nintendo says it's going to remove Neosi from Fire Emblem Three Houses after a number of allegations of abuse from former girlfriends and others.
He's already been replaced in Fire Emblem Heroes with another voice actor, Zach Aguilar, and in a statement to the media, Nintendo says it will do the same in Fire Emblem Three Houses.
Yeah, Nintendo said, quote, after assessing the situation, we decided to re-record the